Коллеги, мы продолжаем. Equipment, headsets. And actually the session will start in 3 minutes. Секция начнется через 3 минуты. Но мы начали...
We have talked a lot about the process of dismantling of the architecture of arms control that has existed for many decades. The treaties in the field of non-proliferation are under threat, like JCPOA, or we see little or no progress in the tasks that we are faced with. I am referring to things like the problem on the Korean Peninsula. There is another fact that we cannot ignore, that is that the people who have created this arms control regime and architecture are leaving us. And I would like to remind you of Ambassador Temirbayev. I have worked with this gentleman for 20 years. He was one of the key negotiators for the Soviet Union on the non-proliferation treaty. Those of you who have participated in our conference in 2017 may remember that in the beginning we had a reception and then we celebrated 90th anniversary of this gentleman. These are the people with a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise, and unfortunately, they are leaving us. A lot of the ideas that Roland is an author of have been put on billboards that we have put on display in the hallway. One of the latest works by Roland were published at Arms Control Today publication. The other work that he started working on in January has never been finished. So it was published just like it was without the final part. We should remember the men who have created the system of arms control. Many of them are no longer with us. In this session, we are starting now. I must say that we started the planning work quite a long time ago, and we had a lot of communication with Yukiya Amano. We wanted to invite him to our conference, and later we realized that it was not very probable that the Director General would have an opportunity to come over. We decided to dedicate one of the sessions to the memory of Yukiya Amano and talk about the legacy that we have. Maybe if we have time, we may look into the future and discuss things that might be central for years to come. We know that the new head of the agency has been elected. I would encourage all panelists to start their presentations with sharing your ideas, your memories of your collaboration with Mr. Amano. Maybe you remember some interesting episodes that you would like to share with us. Before I pass the floor to the three panelists and introduce them quickly, I want to mention that it has been a tradition for our conference to have two co-chairs. Let me introduce to you Marina BELYAEVA, the director at International Cooperation Department in the ROSATOM. When I was a student, Marina was my professor in the university where I studied. She was a professor and she lectured on exports control. Thank you very much, Marina, for joining me at this session. And now I would like to introduce the panelists. Nikolai Spasskiy, Ambassador, Deputy Director General for International Relations at State Atomic Energy Corporation, Rosatom. Mrs. Spasskiy, I would like to use this opportunity and say thank you to Rosatom and to you personally for your efforts. We appreciate what Rosatom is doing in different markets, and we are thankful for the support that you give to our initiative and to other similar initiatives. Next, we have Ernest Moniz, CEO and co-chairman of the board of directors at Nuclear Threat Initiative, also known as NTI. Mr. Moniz was once a U.S. Secretary of Energy. This was between 2013 and 2017. We also are happy to have Massimo Aparo, the Deputy Director General, Head of Department of Safeguards at International Atomic Energy Agency. Dr. Aparo has worked for the agency for a long time when it was headed by Mr. Yukiya Amano. First, let me pass the floor to Marina BELYAEVA, my co-chair. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say a few words before we give the floor to the panelists. I have a background in mathematics, so in preparation for this conference, I looked up a few numbers. This year or next year, we will have 50th anniversary of the NPT, and for 62 years we've had IAEA. I have gone through a lot of names and titles of organizations, and I suddenly realized that Mr. Amano was only the 5th Director General over 60 years, only 5 General Directors, and each one of the leaders had his priorities. Some paid more attention to non-proliferation and control. Others talked about nuclear security, which was relevant at the time. Director General Amano was the first person to focus on a number of areas. Probably my colleagues are going to talk about it. I want to point to one thing only. The role of women in nuclear science. At IAEA, there's been a lot of attention paid to the gender equality issue. Mr. Amano was the first Director General to really promote use of women and the share of women grew from 20 to 30% in the agency. This was one of Mr. Amano's priorities. Some people would find it funny, but I think it is an important subject, and many people see it this way in many parts of the world. With this, I would like to pass the floor to our presenters. Mr. Spasskiy, what can you share with us about Mr. Amano? Thank you very much, Anton, Marina, Mr. Moniz, Mr. Aparo. Ladies and gentlemen, it was a perfectly right decision to dedicate this session to the Director General of IAEA, Mr. Yukiya Amano. It would not be a good idea to turn it into a night of memories. With all the respect for Yukiya Amano, well, I knew this gentleman very well. I was lucky. Of all the people who have not worked full-time in Vienna and at IAEA, I probably spent more time with him than anyone else. But that's not the point. Mr. Amano was a great person of historic significance, and it is easy to understand. For over 10 years, he was the head of IAEA. If we were to use proper language, we could say that he was the head of the IAEA Secretariat, but we all know the role of Director General, if that is a strong professional and a knowledgeable man. He was very close to the 10th years anniversary, and the 10 years that he was with the organization was a very difficult period. This was a time of change. We remember that it was during this period that we have witnessed the Fukushima tragedy, and the entire nuclear community had to live through this difficult period. Under Mr. Amano's leadership and with his direct participation, we have developed one of the most important documents of modern day, that is JCPOA. And with Mr. Amano's participation, we have seen one of the biggest crises in implementation of this document. And the last but not the least, well, IAEA is one of extraordinary organizations. It's one of the biggest UN organizations. I believe that it is the biggest and most significant. We could talk about personal memories of Mr. Amano, but I would like to talk about legacy. Yukiya Amano makes me think about many different things, but the bottom line is he is a historic figure who could really make a difference, and he could make a big difference. I was on the plane last night flying from Berlin, and I was thinking about a lot of things that come to my mind when I think of Yukiya Amano. I was thinking about the role of international organizations in today's world. Some are successful, some are relevant and important, others are not. There is a very painful issue of Iranian nuclear program. The fate of nuclear energy in the 21st century is another big theme. And Yukiya Amano, although this is not something that people often talk about, He headed a big international agency for many years. He is a professional diplomat. He was a career diplomat by education, by background, by nature. And his life makes us think, what can diplomacy achieve in modern world, and what can a diplomat, one man in a specific situation at a specific time do? At the end of my short comments, I want to say that this was a very appropriate decision to dedicate this session to the memory of Yukiya Amano. Mr. Moniz, would you like to be the next?
And also, let me thank you for organizing this conference, and even more for the partnership with NTI that has been very effective and will continue in terms of nuclear issues and, of course, U.S.-Russia relations. And also thank you for the privilege, really, of joining my good friends here to honor Yukiya Amano. I will talk about three ways in which I have intersected with Mr. Amano, both as Energy Secretary in the United States and now as CEO of NTI. The first, and Nikolai mentioned this briefly, was in the rather intense period of the JCPOA negotiations and in the first year of implementation of that agreement. What is sometimes lost in the discussion of the Iran agreement is that really the core of it, the most important part of the agreement, in my view, are the extraordinary verification measures that are built in, including breaking new ground with uranium supply chains and many features of the agreement. Of course, we recognized at the beginning that if we were going to have an extraordinary verification regime, the IAEA was going to have extraordinary responsibilities, and that remains the case. Amano, during the negotiations, I thought showed his exquisite diplomatic skills that you referred to in being able to manage, on the one hand, transparency with not just the United States, but the 6 countries plus the EU plus Iran involved in that, while always maintaining, I would say fiercely maintaining the character of the IAEA in terms of its independence and technical strength. So that was very important. Coming to today, I must say we all know the JCPOA, and this will be a subject of more discussion here, is under quite some considerable strain, to put it mildly. But I do want to note that at least as of today, fundamentally, the steps away from the JCPOA that have been taken by Iran have really not touched the relationship to the IAEA and those verification measures. I certainly hope that will continue to be the case, but I think that there's a recognition that it is the verification regime that ultimately lies at the core of international confidence in Iran's not pursuing a nuclear weapons program. And so I think this is really, I think, a crucial point going forward. And once again, the interactions with Mr. Romano in that period and the sometimes bumpy implementation period were really quite extraordinary. I might add as well, it was clear, thinking of the Iran situation, thinking ahead to a different situation, but another very difficult one, of course, will be, we hope, eventual negotiations on denuclearization in North Korea. And clearly, Mr. Romano was thinking very hard about having the agency ready to step back in to North Korea at the appropriate time to provide, again, the essential independent approach that would be needed for what, frankly, will end up, I hope, eventually to be an even more difficult verification challenge than the one in Iran. The second set of interactions with Yukiya came around the nuclear security agenda. Again, Mr. Amano played an important role in all 4 of the nuclear security summits, but then, of course, launched at the agency the nuclear security ministerials, starting in 2013, which was my first year as Energy Secretary, and ending in 2016, my last year as Energy Secretary. The summit started in 2010. I came in 2013 when the energy ministerials started at IAEA. A little bit confusion there. But my point is, of course, that Amano made a priority of elevating nuclear security at the agency, creating a division, and we at NTI think that this is an extremely important initiative. He also was Director General for coming into force of the amendment to the Convention on Physical Protection of Nuclear Materials, and there, actually on both of those first 2 subjects, I want to also note our hosts here in Russia for the collaborative efforts that were made in those cases. Then the third interaction I'll just mention with him was something that at NTI we celebrated quite enthusiastically. First in 2017 with Amano at the formal launch of the LEU Bank, the IAEA LEU Bank in Kazakhstan, which became operational just last month. The LEU Bank, for those who are not familiar with it, is literally a bank with low-enriched uranium suitable for nuclear reactor fuel that can be drawn upon by any country in good standing with the agency if their supply chain is, for whatever reason, interrupted. This was launched, NTI played the seminal role more than 10 years ago to not only conceive of it, but also to find a nice contribution from Warren Buffett of $50 million to be matched 2-to-1. But the motivation for the LEU Bank is what's important. It's about providing some assurance of nuclear fuel supply so that we can at least minimize or lower any impetus for enrichment, for the spread of enrichment. That's in the context of, especially with one of the drivers being addressing climate change, global warming and climate change, what may be the spread of nuclear fuel cycle, nuclear power and nuclear fuel cycles. And so the LEU Bank, which Mr. Amano certainly supported in the later stages of its development, is one piece of the foundation to build up the assurances that countries need to pursue the peaceful uses of nuclear energy without creating proliferation risks in the fuel cycle. So those are 3 different areas, again, where working with him was a great pleasure and I think very effective. And in each of those cases, as I've pointed out, we have much more work to do, and we will miss him, frankly, in our ability to get those jobs done. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Moniz. And I appreciate what you've said at the beginning. I mean, the partnership with CENESS, and we are open for future cooperation as well. But back to the topic of the session, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Aparo. You worked with DG Amano for many years. So how you see the legacy of DG Amano from inside?
Thank you very much. Let me start saying that for me it's an honor, a pleasure to pay homage to DG Amano. as you said, I've been working in the agency for many years, 23 years. I went through the complete time of DG Albaradane. I went through the complete time with the DG Amano, and we start now with a new DG. Of course, DG Amano for me has been very close. I had much more contact with DG Amano because of my position. DG Amano was the one who selected me as the head of the Iran task force when he created that in 2012. He selected me as the director of the Office for Verification of Iran when he established the office in 2016, and finally he selected me as the Deputy Director General and the head of the Certificate Department last year. And therefore, I had a number of interactions with him, practically, I wouldn't say daily, but at least 3-4 times a week interaction with DG Amano. He used to call me often early in the morning. Early for me is 7 o'clock. For him, it was not that early. And I had the pleasure also to talk to him beyond the issue related to our work. We discussed, the DG Amano too was a very private person, as many Japanese are, and I know that very well because I live in Japan for 2 years. But at the same time, as many Japanese can be suddenly very open and very direct, he shared with me a passion for movies, from Italian movies, and he liked, especially a director died, very famous in Italy, Luchino Visconti, and he made a fantastic movie called Leopard, and it's a beautiful story of Sicily in end of 1800 when Sicily became part of the Italy. And he went to Palermo to visit all the location of this place. And actually he used one of the famous sentence of this movie in one of the retreat with our director, and the sentence was, we need to change to be able to remain the same, which was a lot of the way he was trying to approach the management of the International Atomic Energy Agency. I thought he was a diplomat. He was also a person that liked very much technical details. So he wanted, when he wanted to enter into the detail of the technical issue related to Spasskiy, he wanted to understand the technical part. And only through this, he felt confident to be able to present the issue in his diplomatic way. And in fact, he was very strong in emphasizing that the agency is a technical organization that needs to report fact, no judgment, but only fact, what our respective verify on the ground what we are able to draw in terms of conclusion based on all the collection of the information. Of course, his involvement in Iran, as you both said, was particularly important in all the Iran file. You remember he was the one who started, or at least publish the issue related to the possible military dimension of the Iran nuclear program in 2011, and brought this issue to the conclusion in 2015 when he published the final assessment of the agency on this issue. And he thought, as he always said, and he always reminds us, that the agency is not part of the was not part of the negotiation table in the JCPOA, so they are not we are not interpreting any of the commitment of the requirement of the JCPOA. He had a key role behind the scene in all the discussion, as Secretary Moniz mentioned, at least the first few years, the first initial year of the JCPOA implementation, even before with the JPA temporary agreement. I think he has left a big legacy in the agency. I'm very happy that the new Severdgas laboratory at Sevastopol has been named after him. He was the main driver of all the renovation of all the Severdgas laboratory during his years. And as Marina said, he was a champion of the gender politics. And if you compare how the difference between genders was before his coming into as Director General into the agency to what it is now, you can see how much he was able to have an impact on the gender polity in the agency. What I would like to remind him again also is for the fact that he changed somehow the motto, the statement of the agency, moving from Atoms for Peace statement, a motto for the agency that he started 50, 60 years ago, and move it to Atom for Peace and Development to really show how the agency has expanded its activity not only to support the development of the nuclear energy, to verify the use of that this nuclear energy is also that is only done for peaceful purpose, but also how this nuclear energy can be used for the development of the human being.
Thank you, Dr. Aparo. Before we will start with panelist discussion, further the legacy of DG Aparo, I would like to give the floor to Ambassador of India to the Russian Federation, Venkatesh Varma. When we talked to him weeks ago, and I mentioned that we are going to have this session, he said, please give me 2 minutes because I worked with him and I would like to share my experience. So, Ambassador Varma, you have the floor. Then we will return to the panelists. I understand that a number of people who are in this room worked and would like also to say a few words, and we will be back to you after the panelists. Please.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the panel to bring back very warm memories of Mr. Amano, for whom this panel is dedicated. I knew Mr. Amano as a Japanese diplomat in Geneva in the Conference on Disarmament, and that was our first interaction. Of course, I got to know him very well when, along with Dr. Bill Potter, we were part of an extraordinary GG, little known outside, but of enduring influence and impact on the work of the UN. The GG on disarmament education, disarmament and non-proliferation education. And Mr. Amano made an exceedingly important contribution to that, and that is one of the GG reports that has had enduring value. Mr. Amano was a great advocate of friendship with India. And we're very grateful that as DG for disarmament and non-proliferation in the Japanese Foreign Ministry, and later as the Director General of the IAEA, he played a stellar role in promoting this, and we'd like to convey our absolute gratitude for the support that DG Amano gave to India IAEA relations when India's reactors under safeguards increased, the nature of our safeguards increased, including India's adherence to the additional protocol it signed with the IAEA, and India's contribution to various IAEA's programs increased. So this was one of the great success stories of India's interaction with the IAEA, and a great success story for the IAEA itself as part of its core mandate. But of course, all of us as professionals, we need to pay tribute to his extraordinary skills of steering the agency through very difficult waters. The first, of course, was the Fukushima incident in Japan, and the fact that he himself came from Japan added a poignant responsibility on him as the Director General of the IAEA, and in fact made his task even more difficult. He came from the country that was most affected, and the future of nuclear energy was in the balance. But I think the agency came out stronger. Nuclear safety has come out stronger, and I think we are all grateful that the future of nuclear energy has been reassured after the very difficult period of Fukushima. The Nuclear Security Summit process was another extraordinarily positive interaction that took place. When it began, it was multilateralism, but multilateralism outside the IAEA. And initially, many of us who were involved with it thought there was a conflict of interest. If we were to do nuclear security, it should be done in the place where it's normally done. But I think under DG Amano, we found a perfect fit. Multilateralism anywhere is good, as long as it's compatible and it reinforces the tasks of each other. And I think the Nuclear Security Summit, for the years that it existed, was an extraordinarily successful multilateral effort, which finally also strengthened the IAEA, and I think we need to pay tribute to DG Amano for making that happen. Lastly, the point that you mentioned on Mr. Amano's commitment to the priorities of the developing world. While a lot of focus of the agency is focused on safeguards and the 1 or 2 agreements, which is rightly so, there are important aspects of the agency's work, but there's everyday work which brings meaning and content to what the agency means for millions of people across the world. That is in the area of development, in the area of health, in the area of all other peaceful applications of nuclear energy. I think that again is a tribute to DG Amano's foresight that he embraced this and has actually increased the acceptability and the support base of the agency elsewhere in the world. So we have, in the sad and tragic demise of Mr. Amano, we have the agency now one multilateral institution which has only gotten strengthened through various crises, and we are all grateful that under his leadership that we have an agency that we can all take forward for the mandate that it is designed. And thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ambassador Varma. We have about 55 minutes. У нас около 40.
Okay, we've got about 45, or actually 55 minutes, and I want to ask a question to Mr. Spasskiy, and then Marina will ask questions to other panelists. Now, Mr. Spasskiy, I'm not part of ROSATOM. I'm an outsider, and I look at how your international cooperation have been developing, including your cooperation with the IAEA, and it appears that it was under DG Amano when Russia started to be involved more actively in the various projects implemented through IAEA or together with the IAEA. I mean, the Voluntary Nuclear Safety Fund. Last year, Russia, for the first time, allocated some money to support infrastructure development. So what do you think about the situation as a person from ROSATOM? What kind of developments we've had in the non-energy uses of atomic technologies?
Спасибо большое, Антон.
Thank you, Anton.
With the rule of the priority of of the language of the host country, I can safely switch to English for the sake of my co-panelists. So, thanks for your question. Essentially, once again, we are talking about the legacy of Ambassador Amano. Putting it very bluntly, my country in general and ROSATOM as the entity, we felt very much comfortable with the leadership and guidance of Ambassador Amano of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Let me make one point. Actually, it was emphasized by His Excellency the Ambassador, by my friend Massimo. Essentially, it's very difficult to answer a question when it boils down to just one statement. What is the major, the most essential piece of legacy of Director General Amano? And I would say, this legacy is the professional, non-political character of the agency which he guided for 10 years. So when we acknowledge the huge success of the agency in this time of travail, it explains first and foremost by this reality. And when we witness the election of new Director General designate, our mutual friend Raffaele Grossi, of course, this is the most important wish which we pass to him. This is the guarantee of the success of the agency. And this explains why we found our organization, the ROSATOM, very much on the same wavelength with the agency guided by Ambassador Amano. For example, the most difficult challenge, of course, dealing with the legacy of Fukushima disaster. My colleague mentioned, for him it was twice, thrice difficult, because he was not just Japanese, he was proud to be Japanese. He was Japanese by his character, by his way of thinking. And nevertheless, he was able to get above these national limitations, and I believe he's done a great job. That is why, you know, it's a fantastic case of redefinition when actually we manage, as goes the famous saying, to snatch the victory from the teeth of disaster. Because currently, when we say the post-Fukushima requirements, it's not something negative. It's something very positive. Because it means things that actually it's the synonym of the generation 3+. And it's very particular. And essentially, it's the guarantee for the safe continuation of the use of the nuclear energy in the 21st century. Then Anton mentioned, of course, non-energy applications. Once again, it's not just a case of vogue that now it's popular. It's quite different because the world is huge. There are the newcomer nations to the nuclear energy applications. And of course, not everybody is interested to immediately place as a 1,000 megawatt nuclear power unit. We start with simple things, such as nuclear medicine, cancer treatment, the application of irradiation technology for the sake of preserving agricultural produce in tropical and subtropical climates. And in this case, the leadership of Ambassador Amano was undisputable. We have the so-called PACT, the Program of Action for Cancer Therapy. We have his emphasis, and it was, in my view, a very wise thing to do, that actually he was measured the whole range of activities of the agency against the metrics of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. And thus, Anton Victor is absolutely right when he's mentioning that thanks to his opening up these new horizons, we in our government, because in every single case, it required a decision by the government of the Russian Federation. We could open up such new, completely new programs as our contribution to this cancer action, as our work on the nuclear infrastructure, the monies were allotted, but what was most important, it was us doing the job, but we were doing it in strict compliance with all the rules and regulations set by the agency. And if I may, Anton Viktorovich, one very final note. Of course, once again, we are positive thinkers, but life and history are bizarre. I consider it to be a most strange and the most tragic gimmick of the fate that a man who did so much for cancer treatment around the world, in the poorest countries on the world map, that he himself, being a citizen of one of the most developed countries in the world, with the most developed medicine, that he succumbed exactly to this disease, to cancer. Life is tough. Thank you.
Спасибо. Marina, Pavlovna.
You know, after this, it's very difficult for me to ask questions that I have in mind. Perhaps I can somehow change the tune. Anton started to tell us how bleak the situation is in disarmament and in the nuclear energy field. However, all the interventions tend to suggest that MAGATE has strengthened over the period. MAGATE has become much more efficient, and in fact, its role of IAEA is much more pronounced than it used to be 10 years ago. And this all became possible thanks to the input of this amazing person. Myself and Nikolai dealt a lot with Mr. Amano. He visited Russia on many occasions, and we showed him our facilities. We held many meetings. It was truly amazing, a person full of life. And I should stress that all people present here would also have some facts that would prove that he was a huge lover of life. You know, when we brought him to the Leningrad nuclear power station of Generation 3+, he tortured all those present. He did not ask, some academic questions. No, he wanted to go into detail, and I think he spent there more time than it was necessary. And indeed, he was very keen to learn all the details. So perhaps our panelists could say a few words about him from this standpoint.
Secretary Moniz would like. Okay.
Max, want to start? Maybe?
Well, I said before that the DG Amano liked the technical aspect of the work. He liked it. He wanted us to remain technical. He wanted us to remain factual. You know that he was reading in detail not only every report that the agency submitted to the board, every report, specifically the one in Iran, the one on the Syria case, the one on Fukushima. I saw him entering into detail in calling the people from the nuclear safety to request a technical clarification with respect of a specific statement. He did not let any statement in this report to go through without having analyzed it, without having seen that correspond to a factual evidence of our verification or our assessment or our analysis. Somehow, he liked very much to look at the details. This was something that helped the agency to be able to maintain its objectivity from one point of view and its not discriminatory verification activity in specifically for the Department of Safety. Unfortunately, I never had time enough to follow him while he was working, managing all the other area of the agency. But I saw him during the DGM meeting when all the DDG meet with him, asking specific questions on each of every single area. The technical, sometimes I thought that he needs youth, he may want it to be an engineer, not a diplomat.
Thank you, Dr. Aparo. Since time running fast, I would like to mention another question I have in mind, and Secretary Moniz, if you will make comment on any previous questions which were raised, but also on that one, I would appreciate that. And the question I have in mind, so what the agency could build on this legacy which been discussed, how you see what could be, what should be the central projects, central areas of IAEA work, build on the legacy of IAEA, of DG Amano for the next, let's say, 10 years. What is the most important areas of future IAEA work?
Well, let me first add another dimension of the discussions that we often had. And of course, this was nuclear energy is, of course, part of the solution, but basically climate change. And Amano had a really deep interest in addressing climate change and seeing the agency as being a contributor to that by enabling nuclear power to be a major contributor. And we all know, frankly, certainly in the prospects for nuclear power are rather uneven, shall we say, in different places in the world today. Taking off from that, rather than say any specific program, but I think it is enabling that future of a world with the carbon-free energy that nuclear power affords. Certainly we know in the United States it's been by far the largest contributor to carbon-free electricity. I might add that if one, I'm going to go off a little on climate change and I'll bring it back, but if you think about the Paris meeting at the end of 2015, COP21, that had basically every country in the world making some form of commitment to reducing carbon emissions by 2030, roughly 2030 typically, and committing to about an 80% reduction by mid-century. It's interesting that in just the 4 years since then, the march of climate science is causing many to ratchet up the challenge. And now, for example, it's becoming more and more common that, for example, an 80% reduction by mid-century is being replaced by net zero targets in terms of emissions. How's that relevant here? It's relevant here because the key to the kinds of technologies that one will need for such deep reductions of carbon dioxide is going to call for affordable, carbon-free, not just electricity, but heat as well. And that's where some of the new technologies being developed, Generation 4 technologies, may also have very important contributions to heat. So the answer to your question, in my view, is the agency, while being rigorous in holding the safety and security standards that we will need to succeed, really has to enable those possibilities to materialize at scale. It will be extremely difficult to meet those kinds of targets without a significant contribution from nuclear energy, electricity, and heat in that time period.
Thank you. Ambassador Spasskiy, would you like to intervene at this point and comment on similar issue, how you would see the future of IAEA, what should be the core projects or areas of IAEA work for the upcoming years?
Essentially, I would like to make just one remark,
Please.
because it's a remark about Ambassador Amano, and it's a remark about the future of the organization, of the agency. Let me start a bit from afar. Of course, I'll be very brief. There are two different kinds of courage in the world. There is the kind of courage when a person is capable of going through a dark alley, keeping himself, not knowing what his next step will bring. Of course, it's perfectly laudable and respected, but there is a different kind of courage. When a person, especially in the line of responsibility, is able to tell the truth, even when this truth nobody or practically nobody wants to hear, and when telling this truth for him or her, it's a very difficult and a very tough personal choice. Let me take you just 1 year back. We all remember what was, a year and a half somewhat. We all remember what was happening when the President of the United States of America announced the US walking out on the JCPOA. The tensions were flying hard. We all remember, probably it's not convenient to mention it here, but in the final analysis, Ambassador Amano, who was elected originally by just 1 vote, later on the second and third turn, he was elected by acclaim. Originally, it was this way. And we all know that he owed his election essentially to the support of 2 countries, Japan and the United States of America. And when against this backdrop, the person, and forgive me if I quote a very short statement of his, because this statement, it actually costs a lot. It was early May 2018. Amano was already ill, probably knowing his destiny, probably not. And he said, Iran's implementation of its nuclear-related commitments under the JCPOA, Iran is subject to the world's most robust nuclear verification regime, which is a significant verification gain. As of today, the IAEA can confirm that the nuclear-related commitments are being implemented by Iran. And I believe that this kind of civil and political courage is a very rare thing in the modern world. And if I may get back to the original question of Anton, of course the agency will require sticking to its non-political character, great professionalism, because being professional, you have the moral authority to respond to complicated challenges. But there is another thing which will be in huge demand at the top level of the agency. This kind of courage, of which Director General Amano was perfectly capable.
Thank you, Ambassador Spasskiy. Now we have about 20 minutes before the end of this session. So I invite participants from the audience, first of all, to share your experience, how you see the legacy of DG Amano, and share your experience of working with him. I think we have time for 2 or 3 interventions, and after that, we will give the floor to all 3 panelists for the final words. Who will be the first? Please, Ambassador Logner.
Bernard Lagner, I'm the Swiss ambassador to the IAEA and CTBTO in Vienna. Well, I had the privilege and the honor to present my credentials to DG Amano about 14 months ago. And I just wanted to pick up on something that DG Aparo mentioned, the Atmosphere for Peace and Development. And we've heard about the ministerial conferences on nuclear security, but I also wanted to highlight last year's ministerial conference on nuclear science and applications. So for the first time, we had a ministerial conference highlighting exactly this important area of the applications. And if we think of next year's NPT review conference, it was a good opportunity to remind everybody of the benefits that many countries derive from this third pillar of the NPT. Another conference is planned for 2023, so I think this is also a very important legacy to highlight, as it has already been mentioned, this important dimension of the agency's work, also at the ministerial level. Thank you.
Thank you. Bana, Laura Rockwood. Please, Laura.
I have the distinct honor of having served for 3 of the 5 directors general, and I'm frequently asked, which one did you like the best? They were such very different people. Hans Blix, the quintessential diplomat, Mohammed El Baradei, capable of speaking truth to power, and then we had DG Amano, a French speaker, loved to ballroom dance, very, very bright, very capable. And these are some big shoes for Raphael to fill. I think Cornel did a great job in the interim, and I wish him Godspeed. And Raphael, a lot of courage, because it's not always easy saying no to the big guys. So may he rest in peace, and thank him for giving me the opportunity to work with him.
Thank you, Laura. Anyone else? Then I will give the floor to all 3 panelists in reverse order for final comments. Again, if you have anything else to share, how you see the legacy and the legacy of DG Amano and what we can build on that. Dr. Aparo, please.
Yes. Unfortunately, number of memory that I have with the meeting with DG during the negotiation discussion with the different member states that are highly confidential, and there is very little that I can share of this situation. But there, what I can share is one thing that Laura just mentioned, is capability to be able to withstand the pressure, the insistence of some member states or different member states in different situations, his capability to try always to bring back the discussion of what was the essence of our work, or what was the reason why we were moving in a certain direction on the basis of our technical assessment of our collection of facts. It's true, the work of the agency is becoming, in the last 20 years, is becoming more and more known everywhere in the world. It's becoming, being the Director General of this organization is becoming more and more difficult. Being a Director General of a technical organization that need to handle very sensitive and highly political files require special capability. DG Amano had all these special capabilities.
Thank you. Nikolai Nikolaevich.
Спасибо большое, Antonovich. Very finally, just one personal remark. As I mentioned, both of us, Ambassador Amano and my humble self, we come from the same professional milieu, from diplomacy. So for me, from the very start, there was a very personal touch to our relationship. Yes, I had the honor and the privilege to have different kinds of relationship with him, the purely professional ones, because every mid-year, January or February, we had extensive consultations on the whole gamut of issues pertaining to the relations between my country and the IAEA. But besides, there was the relationship which, as Marina mentioned, I would not hesitate to define as personal, because I had the honor to accompany him on his numerous trips to the Russian Federation, on visiting the facilities. So I always was impressed by one particular feature of his character. You know, when a person of very particular professional background, but essentially it's a humanistic professional background, and he joins a technical international organization, there is a very delicate balancing act to be made, because on the one hand, this person should never, can never project the impression of being an outsider to his new world. On another hand, he should or she should never create the impression that he's on a par with the professionals who have devoted, like Massimo, all their lives to serving in a very professional capacity the goals of this organization. So putting it very simply and very bluntly, a diplomat can never, even in the slightest degree, create the impression that he's on a par with the nuclear engineer, because by definition he cannot be, but at the same time he's heading this organization. And I believe that Ambassador Amano has found a unique answer to this challenge. And this answer is very simple: humility. Yes, as Marina was describing, he was perfectly capable of posing professional, nitty-gritty questions dealing with the reactor, circular pumps, or whatever. But at the same time, he always maintained the visibility of great respect for the professionals in the field. And for me, frankly speaking, since I emphasize in my essentially much humbler capacity, I have to do this balancing act every single day of my life. For me, it's a standing lesson. He's a great person, and that's not just a figure of speech. I hope that for the majority of us, his memory will always stay with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Secretary Moniz.
Well, I would add, and I think it's one of the traits that we have not mentioned today that underlies some of DG Amano's, I think, great success, that he was a great listener, that he would visit us often and didn't miss a thing, and was always analytical about that. We have an expression that, you know, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth to be used in that ratio, and many people don't, but he did, and that was really, really important. Just a few comments more on, again, building from his legacy. Now we will have, of course, new leadership at the agency, with a challenge to live up to the standard that was set, but also many other challenges coming from the real world. On the JCPOA, I would just note, first of all, I would turn around something that Nikolai said earlier. In terms of the JCPOA, it's snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, rather than the other way around. But I think it's hard to know what's going to happen with the JCPOA going forward, how it might be modified perhaps, and come back largely or not. But again, what I will say is the role of the IAEA, the relationship of Iran and the IAEA will certainly be a necessary, having it strong will be a necessary condition for us to get back. And that's a very, very important responsibility. I would add that the challenges that we are dealing with in different ways today, of course, also reflect a very uncertain nuclear development pathway for the entire Middle East region. There are many, many factors involved in there. Needless to say, the same conclusion about the IAEA applies in that should there be a major expansion of nuclear power from Turkey and the Emirates and Saudis and Jordan and Egypt, and we could go on. And this will be a big challenge for you, Max, and for Raphael, et cetera. Finally, I'll just say in that same vein, I alluded to it briefly, but I really hope you have the further challenge of verification in North Korea. That will mean that we are perhaps making some progress, but it would be a hell of a job, frankly, and will require enormous, skillful coordination, certainly with the 6 parties at a minimum, if not more. So I think those are the kinds of skill sets that we are going to be needing to see displayed for some of the toughest challenges that we are definitely going to have. That's in addition to this other role of opening up the possibility of the nuclear arena being critical for addressing our low carbon future. So I think just the centrality of the agency to many of these problems is simply going to grow in the years ahead, and we can only hope that the leadership grows along with it in terms of its ability to increase the scope, frankly, of the work.
Thank you. Please join me to thank all 3 panelists and my co-chair.